Arsenal family, what's up? Man, thank you so much for sticking around with us. Hey, if this is your first time here, my name is Chad. I get the privilege of being the lead pastor here at this community that we call the Arsenal. We love this place, love these people, miss you, but hey, December 13th in 1 week, we're doing worship night. I cannot wait to see your faces, give you some air high fives, some air hugs, stay safe, but I just can't wait to hang out with you. I'm super excited. Hey, today I'm going to continue in our series that we have called God with Us. And look, first off, I want to tell you a little bit about me. All right, we're going to start out with that. Many of you don't know this, and some of you might, but I used to be a much cooler person. All right, I used to be way cooler. I used to ride motorcycles, and not just ride them. I rode motorcycles, really rode them. I'd go to the track. I'd put on all the right safety gear, and I'd ride on the edge, literally, just going through the corners. I'd go, I don't know, it was a blast. It was so much fun. This is back when I was a little younger, and if I fell off, I recovered quicker. I don't do that anymore. I don't recover as quickly. But I would push myself on my bike, to my limit, because let's be honest, the bike had a lot more to go. The limit was set at me, right? But I would push it. I was going as fast as I could. I loved the adrenaline. I loved the rush of being at the track and having fun and seeing what I could do on a motorcycle. It was a lot of fun. That helmet behind me, that's really mine. I didn't borrow that. That was mine. I promise. It used to be me. I used to do this. There was this one time I was at Barber Motorsports Park. It's in Alabama. And I was at a superbike race, and I was just there to watch, but I was at a superbike race, and a friend of mine that worked with some of the race teams, he got me this really amazing opportunity. And I got to ride around the track on a fully tuned, high-speed, one-of-a-kind superbike. These are the ones that the professionals race around the track. And I got to ride one. Now, there was a catch, though. I was on the back of the motorcycle. It was a different experience. Now, here's the deal. The guy in the front who actually had control of the motorcycle, who was taking us around the track, he was a professional motorcycle racer. The dude had skills. He'd done this plenty of times before. His abilities and skill levels were much, much better than mine. But I was way more nervous to get on the back of this motorcycle than I ever was to throw my leg over my motorcycle. So nervous to get on the back of this bike. I'd never done that before. And I wasn't in control. I wasn't the one controlling the throttle. I wasn't the one controlling the brakes. I wasn't the one who was deciding when we were entering the turn and if we were gonna do a wheelie. I was not in control. I was just along for the ride. And I was quite literally placing my life in this man's hands. And I had just met him. We didn't know each other very well. So I was pretty vulnerable. I was in a vulnerable state on the back of this bike. I had to be willing to risk it. I had to be willing to risk being hurt and had to trust his abilities on this motorcycle. This is in fact, this is the definition of vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is willingness to risk hurt or attack. Willingness to be hurt. That's vulnerability. This is my willingness to be hurt and willingness to show emotions or to allow one's weakness to be seen or known. I was in a state of vulnerability. This author and artist that I've really I love his stuff. His name's Scott Erickson. He has this book, it's called Honest Advent, and it just came out, and I've actually been reading through it, and honestly, the last 2 weeks, my talks, a lot of where I'm getting some of this stuff is from here. This fuels where I'm going, where I feel like God is taking us, so it's been good, but in this book, he says, a real connection involves vulnerability. Think about that, a real connection. Not a superficial connection, a real connection involves vulnerability. For us, to make it around this track at all, for me and this rider to make it around this track and or for me to just get to experience that ride, I had to be willing to be vulnerable and to trust the rider. For the ride to go smoothly and us to go as fast as we could, two people on a super bike around the track, I had to lean into it with the rider. I had to go where he was going. This was me, right, just being vulnerable for literally a couple minutes. Not a major part of my life. It was a couple minutes of my life. It's really not anything in the grand scheme of things though, right? Like I rode on the back of a motorcycle for a little bit. A lot of us have risked our lives in ways like that. Like we've got on the back of a motorcycle, we've got in a car with somebody we know that is maybe not the best driver. Like we've done this, right? But honestly, many people, myself included, have been in much more vulnerable scenarios in life. In fact, I can think of at least one that we all have been involved in. One scenario that all of us have been involved in that is, I can't think of a more vulnerable time. And it's that moment where we were a child in our mother's womb. There's not a more vulnerable time in our lives. Even a newborn child, right? A baby that's just been born, they literally can't do anything for themselves. They need something, a parent, an adult, somebody to do basically everything for them, right? Like even my 2-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 9-year-old, my 15-year-old, they still need me or their mom to do things for them, to sustain them in life. Like my 15-year-old may think that he can do it, but it wouldn't last very long, right? He needs somebody. He needs an adult that can, I'm sure he could figure it out, but like, you get what I'm saying. We're vulnerable in that state, but never more vulnerable than that moment in the womb of our mother. We've all been vulnerable at times. This incredible process of a child being knitted together in their mother's wombs is one of the most delicate and most vulnerable states that anyone can be in ever. The child being formed has to trust, obviously they don't know this, but they're trusting the mother to provide all of its needs. From nourishment to rest to energy to protection, everything. So that child can be knitted together to wonderful completion, right? To get to completion, it had to have all of these things from the mother. And in the same scenario, the mother offers herself to this child, trusting the baby will take what it needs to mature to completion, while like refraining from harming or hurting or depleting the mother in her own delicate state as she's carrying another life within her. It's this like fascinating like biological process in our lives, right? Both parties grow together, connected at their vulnerabilities. Both parties take the risk of creating something new together. There's this incredible place of vulnerability where a child and a mother meet in the womb. It's interesting, in Luke 1, we see this incredible life-forming process taking place in the beginning of Jesus' incarnation story. Right? We've all heard this. Like the angel comes to Mary and says that she will give birth to this child. And right after Mary learns of this, she knows that Elizabeth is also pregnant, and she takes off. And in Luke 1:39, we're going to start there. It says this: Mary didn't waste a minute. She got up and traveled to a town in Judah in the hill country, straight to Zechariah's house, and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby in her womb leaped. She was filled with the Holy Spirit and sang out exuberantly. Elizabeth said, "You're so blessed among women, and the babe in your womb also blessed. And why am I so blessed that the mother of my Lord visits me? The moment the sound of your greeting entered my ears, the babe in my womb skipped like a lamb for sheer joy. Blessed woman, who believed what God said, believed every word would come true." Look, a lot of time during this Advent and Christmas season, we spend talking about baby Jesus, right? Like that, and we should. That is a major factor in what we're talking about in the incarnation, the baby in the manger. But have you ever thought about how vulnerable God chose to make himself to be with us in that moment? This is God, right? The one that created everything, the God of the universe could have chosen so many different ways to be with us. But he chose vulnerability as his starting point. I remember 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago, getting a phone call from Maudie that she was going into labor. And she was going into labor 6 weeks earlier than we had planned, or that we had been told was going to happen. And our son Jackson was born so early that he had to spend a couple weeks in the NICU. Just thinking about vulnerability through the birthing process. Like Jackson had to have like tubes and hoses and wires and all kinds of stuff hooked up to him to keep him alive in the beginning, to help him get through the process where he could breathe on his own, where he could take in milk, where he could use the bathroom in his diaper. Like all of these things had to happen before we could take Jackson home because he was in a very vulnerable state. There were other babies in the NICU that were even more vulnerable than him. They're vulnerable to all sorts of things. It's such a vulnerable time in our lives. But the vulnerable place is where God decided to join us. In fact, in Philippians 2, it says Jesus, it's talking about Jesus, it says this, he existed in the form of God, yet he gave no thought to seizing equality with God as his supreme prize. Instead, he emptied himself of his outward glory by reducing himself to the form of a lowly servant. He became human. He humbled himself and became vulnerable, choosing to be revealed as a man and was obedient. He became vulnerable to be with us. He took the equality with God, his status of deity, and it says that he set it aside. He humbled himself and became vulnerable. Think about it. What was the definition of vulnerability? Willingness to risk being hurt or attacked. Willingness to show emotion or to allow one's weakness to be seen or known. Jesus stepped into the world in a vulnerable state. What does this say about our God? Our God who chose to come into the world through his creation, putting himself in a place of vulnerability to Mary as his mother, in the womb even. The vulnerability that was there with Mary and Jesus in his womb, and then when he's born, the vulnerability of being a child, a newborn who needed his mother to nourish him. He needed his mother and father to provide shelter and anything for him. He could have done so many other things, but this is how he chose to come to us, to meet us in this vulnerable state. What does this say about a God who is willing to be vulnerable with us? What does this say about a God who's willing to be attached at the placenta for nourishment and life to his own creation? Have you ever thought about that? What does it say about this God who's willing to wait and grow in the human womb and take the time to grow to completion as a baby? What does it say about a God who's willing to be fearfully and wonderfully made just like we are? I think the Creator knew that vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Through God's show of vulnerability and trust, through this incarnation, we are invited into a place of vulnerability with him. We're asked to trust a God that chose to come to be with us in the most vulnerable state a deity could ever choose to come to us in the form of a baby in his mother's womb. This isn't just a God up there. This isn't just a God who's outside of everything. This is a God in the flesh that chose to be with us, that it says humbled himself and became vulnerable. This is the beauty and the invitation of the incarnation. Vulnerability, trust. There were quite a few people that day at Barber Motorsports Park. They got to ride on the back of the motorcycle with this professional motorcycle racer taking us around the track. And you could tell the ones that trusted the rider and the rider's ability. And then there were the ones that you could tell they just didn't. They didn't trust, they didn't know what was going on. There were some people, I remember there was a lady who was a newscaster that got this opportunity to ride on the back. I don't think she'd ever been on a motorcycle in her life. And she's getting on the back of a race bike to go around a track at upwards of 130 miles per hour. The ones that didn't trust him, you could tell, especially in turn one, when he's going in and he's getting ready to make the first turn, as the bike began to lean and got closer and closer to the ground, the bike's going this way, right? And they began to lean this way. They would throw off the balance of the bike. They would try to counterbalance as he's going through the corner. So the bike's going this way and they're trying to lean this way, and the bike had to go slower. The rider had to go slower. He had to be careful. He couldn't go through the corner in the way that he knows how to do it, because he had to think about the person on the back that didn't trust him enough to lean into where he was going. So he had to slow it down and had to stand the bike up a little bit more and go around the track a little slower and not do things the way that he normally would, because this person that was riding with him wasn't trusting his ability. And the ones that did trust him, the ones that knew what was kind of going on, I was one of the, I knew what was going on. I trusted this man. So we would lean into the corners with the rider. So when he'd go into turn one and he'd lean into the corner, there was these handles that were on actually the tank of the motorcycle that I could hold on to. So I'm holding around him on the tank. I'm holding on. And when we'd go into the corner, he'd go in and I could slide off the bike like him and I'd lean in with him. And I remember through turn one, I remember us going through turn one, and he got up and he looked back at me and gave me a thumbs up, because he knew that I trusted him. I knew where we were going, and in that moment, he sped up just a little bit more, because he could tell that I was willing to trust him. I was willing to shift my weight when he shifted his weight. I was willing to lean into the corner that may seem scary. I would lean with him. We went where he wanted to go, how he wanted to go. It made the ride a lot smoother, and it made the ride a lot faster. And it made the ride a lot more fun for me. You see, either way, we all made it around the track. We all got back to the place where we started. But some rides were just that much smoother, that much faster, that much more fun than some other ones. You see, God met us in this place of vulnerability. He entered into a relationship with his creation through vulnerability. He could have chosen so many other ways to do this. Less risky ways to do this. But he said, I'm going to do this from the beginning. I'm going to trust my creation with me. I'm going to step into this world and show them vulnerability, because I know that through my vulnerability, they will be called into a place of vulnerability where they can trust me with their lives. You see, just like on the back of that motorcycle, God just says, follow my lead. Allow me to take you where we're going. Any real connection, remember, involves vulnerability. He says, I've set this up so you can trust me. I've got your back. I'm not going to do anything that can harm you. We're going to go through this thing together. He says to lean into the corners. Don't try to counterbalance. Don't think that you know better, but lean in. Trust the one that's in control. You can trust the God that chose to meet us in our most vulnerable state. In fact, it's really interesting. I think that a lot of times in our relationship with God, it is in our most vulnerable state that we really experience the life that Christ is showing us. We really experience the place where God is saying, you can trust me here. And in that place of hurt or harm or where we feel like we don't know what way is up, it's in that vulnerable place that God meets us. Even if that place is a place where we have decided to take it on our own. You see, I've tried to run the track on my own motorcycle, and I thought I did really well. But in my pushing and trying on my own, it didn't end up so well for me. And I feel like it's in those moments, through the tumbling of life, where we are vulnerable and we meet the God who chose to meet us in the most vulnerable state. Arsenal family, I love you. If you're in a place where you feel like you're tumbling right now, know that God is here to meet you there. He's not outside or our view. He's not away from us, but he stepped into this world through vulnerability to meet us in our vulnerability so that he could show us that we can trust him. So if you're in a place where you're in that tumble of life right now, 2020 feels like a tumble of life right now. God is saying, hey, I know what vulnerability looks like. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Let me meet you where you are vulnerable. I love you guys. Let's be vulnerable and allow God to meet us in that place today. If you've got questions or you need anything from us, hit us up. Don't forget to text us on that number. We would love to just connect with you throughout the week. We'd love to drop little nuggets of good news in your life. We'd love to remind you that vulnerability breeds vulnerability, that God is here for you, that God is with us, that he loves us, that the whole point of the incarnation was relationship with us. And all real connection begins with vulnerability. Love you guys. Don't forget, as we say every week, go love well. It's truly who you were made to be. We'll see you next time.
Thank y'all so much for hanging out with us this morning. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And lastly, again, be sure to text this number on the screen just to kind of connect with us throughout the week. Also, we have this thing called The Chat every Wednesday at 4 p.m. with Chad and Rob. Don't miss out. It's super funny, super good, and just really just a blessing, just a middle of the week. And again, don't forget, worship night, December 13th at 5 p.m. is going to be cold, so head over to our merch store and get a hoodie. Hey, and with that being said, have an amazing week. We love you, Arsenal family. God bless.